Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Halloween week, everybody, and happy week 9. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great, and it's a great day to break down some Monday Night Football takeaways, some sheesh from week 8, and of course, all the utilization goodness one could ever ask for ahead of really the start of the second half of the season. So joining me today is the one, the only Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. Dwain, happy week 9.
Happy week 9. I have to say, like, my wife would be super proud of that intro, guys. Way to go, Kelsey and Swing. Really nicely done. Pretty spooky. Like, we've got all the Halloween decorations out. Like, she's really into it. So, yeah, the show fitting the vibe. Love it.
Absolutely. Got that little Saw theme going as to details, Dwain. That's what life is all about. And what is also all about is Monday Night Football, and we had some more good action going on. The Steelers ended up taking down the Giants 26-18. Pittsburgh did cover as 6-point favorites. The over cashed at 37. So, Dwain, was another really great performance from Russell Wilson. Probably even better than his debut, man. Yes, had the late game fumble. Started to feel himself a little bit too much scrambled out there. But in his defense, also kind of got punched in the face before it happened, so that didn't exactly make life easier. Really did throw, more than a few moonballs, though, that were absolutely on target. So continuing to prove that, so it turns out Mike Tomlin knows what he was doing when he did elevate him ahead of Justin Fields. Now going into a week 9 bye, certainly seems like Russ will have a pretty long leash moving forward. Sadly, though, Dwayne, that nice performance did not carry over to George Pickens. 4 catches for 74 yards on 5 targets didn't absolutely kill you, but man, if you had the pleasure of watching the game, you saw just how close he was to a huge game. First had an 11-yard touchdown nullified on a face mask penalty, which it was a face mask, but it didn't really impact Pickens getting wide open in the end zone to score the touchdown. But then later, Dwayne, one of the more sheeshier plays of the year, caught a 9-yard touchdown, got his right foot in twice, but because his left foot didn't come down in bounds, it was ruled an incomplete pass. What are we doing here? I thought this was America, Dwayne. 2 right feet don't equal 2 normal feet.
Yeah, we needed John Madden on that. Back in the day, he would always explain, he's like, 1 knee equals 2 feet, 1 elbow equals 2 feet, 2 feet does not equal two of the same foot does not equal 2 feet. That's still just 1 foot. But yeah, man, look, there's a definite vibe here between these two guys. So didn't come through in a huge way for you in the box score, but man, you got to be feeling better about Pickens. Also, the deep shot down the sideline, the moon ball, perfect in the breadbasket, had another one, to Calvin Austin. Calvin Austin is suddenly looking like, okay, maybe they work him into that kind of Tyler Lockett slot vertical role. Not saying he's going to be a viable fantasy threat all the time, but yeah, the Steelers offense looking much more viable with Russ.
And man, look at the schedule right now, coming off their bye. Commanders, Ravens, Browns, Bengals, Browns, Eagles, Ravens, going into week 16. So really quite a few matchups for this passing game to hopefully keep on keeping on. You mentioned Calvin Austin also had a punt return touchdown. Nice little 2-touchdown Monday night performance. I believe the first guy since Devin Hester to have a return and receiving touchdown on a Monday Night Football. So great day to be great there. But Dwayne, the other big takeaway was this backfield. Still Najee Harris leading away. However, that pie as a whole seems to be getting bigger during the absence of Justin Fields.
Yeah, with Justin Fields out, like over these last couple of games, Ian, now we've got 63% of the rushing attempts going to Najee Harris. Before that was 53%. So a 10% bump. What that's doing, that means he's gone from 19 opportunities per game to 22 opportunities per game. So he's really locked into that mid-range running back 2 conversation. I think of him like David Montgomery. I think of him in the same range as Brian Robinson. Not as good as those offenses, but he's still a little more involved in the passing attack than what those 2 backs are. So really in that same range as those guys. And then when we talk about Jalen Warren, finally healthy, Ian. I think that's the big thing for him. And again, without Justin Fields back there, over these last 2 games, we've seen Jalen Warren average 14 opportunities between targets and rushing attempts. So that gets him back into that running back 3 flex range. And if something did happen with Najee Harris, obviously we don't want it to, but if it did, that could push him into running back 2 territory, possibly even running back 1 as well. So yeah, both of these guys are back in play, but like you said, on bye, so we will have to wait another week.
Good to see Jalen Warren certainly looking far healthier over these past 2 weeks than he did earlier in the year. But that said, Dwayne, Najee Harris has been the best RB in Pittsburgh pretty much all season. Broken tackle numbers really up over the last few weeks and looking a little bit more like that, first round running back out of Bama that people were much more excited about a few short years ago. Over with the Giants, though, again, disappointing effort. Weren't able to score more than 18 points, obviously. However, honestly, like Daniel Jones, I thought stood up better against this Steelers team than expected. I know it ended with the strip sack by TJ Watt, and he had the interception afterwards over Devin Singletary's head, which was not ideal, but several nice downfield throws to Darius Slayton, and also nearly had a 21-yard touchdown to Malik Neighbors. Unfortunately, couldn't quite get that second foot down in bounds. So again, not the most prolific passing performance, but with Neighbors, week high 131 unrealized air yards, still very much getting that wide receiver one level workload. And 7 for 71 guys against the Steelers. We have seen worse duds coming from a wide receiver one. So still feeling good there. And Dwayne, pending the concussion protocol, feeling especially good about Tyron Tracy, someone who we saw briefly, seemingly, take over the backfield last week, but we had the whole Devin Singletary maybe being eased in storyline going. Now, this looks like Tyron Tracy's backfield. It looks like he's here to stay.
Yeah, I mean, Devin Singletary only had 8% of the rushing attempts last night. So Tyrone Tracy at 83% would have been higher than that if he wasn't removed from the end of the game, and just continues to look really good. Ian just has such a natural feel. Now, some of these things are huge holes from the Giants line, but he has a great feel for those, and he quickly gets to that read and gets downhill. For a guy that used to be a wide receiver just 2 seasons ago, I just continue to be pretty amazed by how well Tyrone Tracy is playing. We obviously know that gives him untapped upside out of the backfield as a receiver as well. They were trying to get those design looks to him in the screen game to kind of try to keep, TJ Watt off the back of Daniel Jones. Overall, the Giants did a really good job last night on TJ Watt. They did let him get, the most important play at the end of the game, but Daniel Jones did come in and say that was on him. That was his responsibility to get a chip over there to help out his tackle, and that didn't happen. But yes, Tyrone Tracy, man, in this role, I think we can say he's the clear 1A moving forward, and that makes him a borderline running back one in the right matchups.
About to say, man, 1A, it seems like he is just the clear one. Singletary, get ready to just sit on that
one.
bench.
You're right. Shouldn't say 1A. Yes, he's the one. Yes.
That said, before earlier in the season when Tracy hadn't taken over yet, we saw Singletary have that big time workload. And with Tracy in the concussion protocol, that could be on the table with a short week ahead before this week 9 matchup against the Commanders. Giants have a week 11 bye. We don't know how serious the Tracy concussion is. I get a little bit nervous because we saw Malik Neighbors miss so much time, but for all we know, it could be completely different, severities attached to the concussions. Just please, Dwayne, give us Tyron Tracy ahead of that week 10 smash spot against the Carolina Panthers. That's where we will really be knocking down that RB1 door. So again, good little Monday Night Football action. Hope you guys enjoyed it, but plenty of more sheesh and utilization goodness to get to. First, I want to quickly run through some news because there was plenty of it on an ever eventful Monday in the NFL. At the quarterback position, good news, Jordan Love's MRI came back with good news. It's just a strained groin, nothing major. Has a shot to play Sunday. However, the Packers do have a week 10 bye, so it would make sense if we get 1 week of the Malik Willis experience. Shouldn't be a long-term absence for Jordan Love, though. Also, Anthony Richardson probably still going to be starting on Sunday. We actually got Shane Steichen saying we're evaluating everything, but Stephen Holder said the feedback he got strongly suggested they're sticking with the status quo. Saints quarterback Derek Carr seemingly good to go for this Sunday against Carolina. Dennis Allen expressed optimism that he would play. And also Browns head coach Kevin Stefanski confirmed Jameis Winston will be the Browns starting quarterback moving forward. Not sure he needed to confirm that, but I guess it's nice to hear. 49ers running back Christian McCaffrey with his Achilles injury going to, quote, hit it hard this week with simulated practice workouts. Hopefully we'll be back practicing it next week after the 49ers bye if all goes well. Stephon Diggs not expected to play Thursday with his knee injury per Ian Rappaport. Still haven't gotten a full diagnosis. I'm hopeful that means that, it won't be too long-term of an injury, but who really knows at this point? Sadly, though, Jaguars could be without their best wide receiver. Obviously, Christian Kirk already out, but Brian Thomas Jr. with a rib injury. Day-to-day, per Doug Peterson, apparently the MRI showed it's just a rib contusion, so that is good news. However, Jeremy Fowler did report initially that it could be a 2 to 4 week absence, so stay tuned there. DK Metcalf optimism for this week per Mike McDonald. T. Higgins day-to-day per Zach Taylor. He always freaking says that. It makes me really annoyed. Deontay Johnson expected to be traded by next week per Adam Schefter. Funny how that works out. More 49ers updates. Jawan Jennings expected to be back for week 10. Debo and Jordan Mason will be reevaluated following their bye. Also, Alan Lazard considered week-to-week. Bub Means has a high ankle sprain, and Roman Wilson placed on IR. And finally, the Patriots traded outside linebacker Josh Uch to the Chiefs to, help out their squad. So that was the news, everyone. And now before we we get to some sheeshes of the week, a quick word to our friends over at Knockaround. Love me my knockarounds, stunting the Steelers today, coming off their win. As you guys can see, you know their Steeler glass is not overwhelming, but the black and yellow going on. Shout out Wiz, and really, guys, again, can't express enough how not only comfortable these are, but also just flexible and built well. And yeah, they're really nice freaking sunglasses. So truly do appreciate everything Knockaround has done for us. And guess what? You guys can get in on the fun by heading to knockaround.com and picking up your new go-to pair of polarized shades for less than $50. With over 25 frame styles and dozens of colors, you are guaranteed to find sunglasses that look good and protect your eyes with full UV 400 protection. And be sure to check out Knockaround's officially licensed NFL collection that, again, I am rocking right now. You can get a cool little carrying bag for your team. Why not? And yeah, guys, so you can rep your team all week and hopefully, and seeming like it's going to be the way for the Steelers, all the way through the playoffs. Visit knockaround.com and use code LIFE for free shipping on your order. Sheesh is right, Dwayne, and week 8 had plenty of it, especially the Baltimore Ravens. My goodness, whether it's their offense, defense, pick a position, and there's a good chance we were sheeshing. 4 specific moments stuck out to me, though, Dwayne. We had Lamar Jackson missing Zay Flowers on a pretty wide open 31-yard touchdown. Now, I'm not going to blame Denzel Ward because Lamar had like 6 seconds in the pocket. Zay Flowers was out there doing his best Senior Bowl no pass rush impression, putting, Ward into a pretzel there. But long story short, got open deep and Lamar missed him. Again, could have been a 31-yard score. Additionally, later in the game, and I had to check the all 22 to be sure, but yeah, the Browns were trying to basically get set up right, had too many men on the field. Isaiah Likely got wide open over the middle. I'm not kidding, Dwayne. If Lamar just puts it on him, 86 yards to the house in the fourth quarter. Unfortunately, he overthrew it. Also had a pretty bad drop by Rashad Bateman that could have produced a 50-yard chunk gain later on that same drive. In Bateman's defense, though, the sun got in his eyes, but probably the most inexcusable sheeshes of the day, Dwayne. Not 1, not 2, but 3 dropped interceptions from this Ravens defense. They are now the only defense to have done this season, and they even did it back in week 4 as well. The Ravens have now dropped 8 different interceptions. No other team has more than 5. So again, goes to show that the Ravens, as bad as they have been with the secondary, maybe they could be better. They just learn how to catch the football, but I don't know, Dwayne, that's kind of a big part of playing defense as well. So thoughts on, again, what was a pretty sheeshy afternoon for Baltimore.
Yeah, I would say on the defensive side, that's also the joy of playing Jameis Winston. So Jameis was out there living his YOLO life, and we know those things are going to happen, right? He's going to throw the touchdowns. He's also going to throw the picks. Got a little bit lucky in this one. My other big takeaway, though, Ian, just overall, like sheesh stuff is great, but it's just like the upside of this passing game in Baltimore now. Look at the last 4 games, man. 348 yards passing, 323, 281, 289. So, I mean, the upside is there for all of these guys. That's what's helping Mark Andrews. He's getting more playing time, but that's also what can help Isaiah Likely. I know he's been a little down, but Zay Flowers, obviously the big winner here, leading this team with a 27% target share and getting these games where they actually use him downfield. He had an average depth of target this past weekend, Ian, of 17. So nice to see Zay getting loose. We have a lot of guys out there saying, oh, Zay Flowers, he's just a gimmick guy around the line of scrimmage. Obviously, they have not laid eyes on the film, and we saw all that come true this weekend. So Zay Flowers, a guy you're loving having on your fantasy team with Lamar Jackson getting things going like this.
Big time test for the Ravens next week against that Pat Surtain-led Broncos secondary. But yeah, certainly seems like they are an offense that can get the job done against pretty much anyone at this point. Another team that, again, maybe had quite a bit different performance in the box score indicated, the Indianapolis Colts, Dwayne. So we mentioned this on the Sunday Night Pod before we had a chance to fully review the film. But even then, man, it was pretty clear that as bad as Anthony Richardson's performance looked in the box score, really wasn't his worst game. So I know right now the big news coverage and the story is how he pulled himself out, and feel free to have whatever opinion you want on that. But man, over the course of that Sunday afternoon, wasn't just A.D. Mitchell having a 25-yard touchdown where it was in his hands, just couldn't get the 2 feet down despite seemingly having room to do it. Wasn't just Tyler Goodson dropping a 25-yard touchdown. It was these Colts receivers, Dwayne, going 1 for 8 on contested targets, now his 6th lowest rate of just catching them in the league this year, and really one play after another, man, not doing Richardson many favors. So I know I've been a little bit biased, okay? I drafted a lot of Anthony Richardson, but truly some of the brightest minds in our football media world, like Ben Solak, like Steven Ruiz with the Ringer, they are echoing the sentiment, guys. Really wasn't as bad of a game from Richardson as we would expect. So I know, Dwayne, you can take, the 6 or 7 plays and put them on, and we're still barely scrapping a 50% completion rate. Not necessarily saying that, Richardson is all of a sudden someone we can trust in fantasy land, but at least for last week, man, I thought it was a more daring performance from Michael Pittman, honestly, than anyone.
Yeah, I mean, the receivers struggled last week, but also when you throw into contested situations, contested catches are there's a lot of variance involved. It doesn't surprise me that they caught 1 for 8. Next week, it could be 6 for 8. That's just the way contested catches go. But the problem for Anthony Richardson is there also something about this catchable ball thing? I don't know. I'm not going to get into it, but is he going? It would be terrible if he's also Trevor Lawrence, meaning even when he does make the throws, the receivers can't catch the ball because he can barely ever hit the receivers, man. 31% completion rate. I get it. Could have had more big plays. But look, to survive in the NFL, as a baseline, you got to be able to complete over 50% of your passes. He hasn't done that yet this season in a full game. He's not gotten over 50% one single time. So right now, really a problem for Anthony Richardson and the completion rate percentage from that standpoint. But overall, fantasy, we don't care as much, Ian. I still think he probably comes through for fantasy this season. But yeah, man, it's a real struggle on the NFL level.
I had to fact check you on the 50% thing, and you're wrong, Dwayne. He went 3 for 4 against the Steelers.
I told you in full games. I'm not counting that crap.
I know you were correct, but I did think that's a wild stat, man. Good job by you. So I believe it was Adam Levitan, GOAT of the industry, always doing great stuff at Establish a Run. Yeah, he noted that he believes the modern record for ineptitude in terms of the low completion rate. Achilles Smith, Dwayne, 44.2% of his passes in the 2000 season. Right now, Richardson at 44.4%. Somehow worse than Tim Tebow. Hate to see that. All right, Dwayne, last category I really do want to get through is going to be stopped at the 1 yard line and did not score because, man, only 3 feet away from getting that touchdown. Unfortunately, couldn't quite get there. Saquon Barkley, not once but twice, man, continuing to fall into that same issue that we've seen play DeAndre Swift and before him, Miles Sanders over the years. Also had Alexander Madison twice on the same drive. Hilarious 14 carries for 15-yard stat line. David Montgomery, James Conner, Kenneth Walker, and Zach Charbonnet. Tank Bigsby, Javonte Williams, and Hassan Haskins rounding out the running backs. And then even at wide receiver, Dwayne, some already big games that could have been that much bigger. Garrett Wilson, Lab McConkey, that's right, almost had 3 touchdowns. Josh Downs almost had a second. Cortland Sutton lost a fumble down the stretch. Kayshon Boutte and DeAndre Carter as well. And then at tight end, Sam Laporta, Elijah Higgins, Julian Hill, and how could I not mention, Dwayne, Bears backup center Doug Kramer, who lost a fumble at the 1 yard line because, of course, he did at the end of the game. So, again, one of those things where with Saquon Barkley, look, we would have drafted far more of him if we could go back and do it again. I'm not trying to push anything aside from his great season so far, but this is the sort of stuff, Dwayne, that did make a large portion of the fantasy community not draft as much as them as they probably would have preferred.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, we probably did overthink it. It's the Eagles offense. They've got a good offensive line. Saquon, he's a little older, but he's not in that range where he's going to be for sure dust. So, yeah, we'll just take the L on it, in my opinion. Now, to be fair, we were never saying he wasn't like a top 6-7 running back. It was just a matter of, did you want to take him over a wide receiver who have all been hurt, Ian? So if you took the wide receiver, you most likely took the wrong player over Saquon Barkley. I know I took Nico Collins many, many times, and that's been pretty painful.
I mean, Saquon right now, 5.9 yards per carry. He's just, him and Derrick Henry, really just the best, and honestly, kind of similar reason why people were afraid of them. They needed to be among, and if not among, just like the best running backs in the league, just pure rushing on the ground. And guess what? They have been, haven't been catching a ton of passes. In Saquon's case, he is losing touchdowns at the goal line to Jalen Hurts. But you know what? Even if it isn't a perfect 10, utilization score out here, still pretty freaking good for fantasy leagues of all shapes and sizes. So, guys, plenty of more in the Sheesh Report. Got in a special section on George Pickens. Mentioned Bo Nix almost having a bigger day. Unrealized air yards leaderboard, all that and so much more. So make sure you check it out over at FantasyLife.com. Always free for the masses. So now time to get into plenty of utilization report madness. But first, a quick word to our friends over at Mike's Hard Lemonade. Fantasy football season is here, and while that may be cause for celebration, there will be some hard days ahead. But Mike's Hard Lemonade wants to remind you that hard days deserve a hard lemonade. So after a hard day spent scouring the waiver wire or concocting the perfect trade or tinkering endlessly with your starting lineup, it's time to quench your hard-earned thirst with a Mike's Hard Lemonade. Utilization Tuesday, Dwayne. Let's get after it. As always, presented by our friends over at DraftKings. So, want to get through some upgrades first, then we're going to go through some waiver wire madness, and close things out with a not in my league pal section. Always enjoyed that vibe. So, first one, let's talk about Dolphins offense that looked pretty freaking good last week, at least relative to the Snoop Huntley experience that we had to go through, and specifically running back Devin Achane, who not getting the full 3 down, 90% snap rate. We did see those 2 goal line touchdowns from Raheem Mostert. But Dwayne, a guy this year that has more PPR points from just receiving than Jalen Waddle at this point, and accordingly, man, deserves a big upgrade in the old fantasy ranks.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know Achane, first couple of weeks, you felt great about it. It was explosive out of the gate. Then it was, we've got an injury to Mostert. He's going to get all the carries. We don't have Tua. We'll still survive. Then he gets hurt. And then he comes back. He's not the same. You're still dealing with an offense without Tua. Well, all of that's gone now. So the upside you mentioned is back with Tungo Vailoa back in the starting position. But the big thing here, Ian, is what you mentioned. It's the utilization score over the last 2 games. And it's important because these are the 2 games where we've had both he and Raheem Mostert healthy together. Now, to your point, he's not getting all of the rushing attempts, only 42% over this 2-game stretch, but he's very involved in the passing game, has a 61% route participation. And over these 2 games, Ian, we have seen him average 17.5 opportunities. So that's just adding your targets and your receptions together. And if you guys know, 17.5 opportunities for a guy like Achane in this type of offense is worth like 25 for some other running backs. And that's what we're seeing happen. So in the 7 games over the last 2 seasons where Achane has had 12 to 21 opportunities, I kind of took a ban there. And yes, I took some cuts, guys, but 12 to 21. So not saying he's getting 25 touches, but with Tua in those games, he's averaged 20.5 fantasy points. So if you look at his utilization score of 8.7, it also says at a minimum, he's probably a low end running back 1. So yes, really all the data points lining up for Mr. Achane. And Mostert also not dead, Ian. This is the kind of offense where you can't have 2 backs survive. He scored the 2 touchdowns. We also know Mostert could pop off for a long play at any time. But yes, looking at Achane, big upgrade, low end running back 1.
And guys, just saying, you're not going to be able to start him, but if you do see Jalen Wright popping up on that waiver wire and you have the roster spot, continues to be one of the better, low-key handcuffs in fantasy football. So Achane this year now in 3 full games with Tua, RB3, RB2, and yes, RB2 again, now facing that Bills 31st ranked defense against RB's giddy up Achane managers. Let's talk about another pair of players who returned from injury. Dwayne, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp coming off wide receiver 14 and wide receiver 24 finishes respectively. And turns out Matthew Stafford in this Rams passing game, pretty great once they have their top 2 wide receivers, back and fold. Funny how that works.
Yeah, I mean, it's the duo we like to refer to as Puka Nacua. So it's going really well, Ian, getting them both back for the first game. I saw some people complaining about Cooper Kupp. I'm like, dude, give you 16.1 fantasy points. I mean, I know you were expecting 30, but you got 16.1. I will say Kupp didn't look 100%. Of the 2 guys, Puka Nacua actually looked like the more healthy of the 2 players, other than having to take a few extra plays off. We did see Nacua only out there for 65% of the routes. He played most of the time in the first half, took a little more easy on him in the second half when the game script got to a position. But did you notice that whenever it came down to crunch time and they needed to really get a block in the run game, who was back out there? Puka Nacua just cleaning up people, cracking down on linebackers. This dude is just really fun to watch all around. I've also heard a little bit out there like, can these 2 guys survive together? Well, number one, we saw him do that already last year, guys. But if you look at Puka Nacua, whenever he's on the field with Cooper Kupp, he has a 29% target share over the last 2 seasons, Ian, with a 2.5 yards per route run. Cooper Kupp, 27% target share. So it's just one of those offenses where it's going to be very consolidated around both of these guys. I do think that both of them can eat. I think you can make an argument, Ian, moving forward from here. they're both low-end wide receiver ones, especially with all the injuries we have at the wide receiver position right now. That gives them a little bit of an extra bump. You might be talking about them both as more borderline wide receiver ones. I still think that maybe Kupp has the higher ceiling just because of what we saw out of the gate this year. He could come through with one of those 35-40% kind of target share situations. But I think with both of them together, they offset each other enough. I'm thinking borderline wide receiver ones, low-end wide receiver ones the rest of the way.
At a minimum, we're talking, top 20 at the worst, probably more likely top 15, which means, they're going to be in lineups of all shapes and sizes. So, hey, man, if Demarcus Robinson is going to catch 2 touchdowns per week, certainly would think more fantasy points to go around for these two. And again, in a passing game that, honestly, not surprisingly, took that big step forward. Matthew Stafford, Dwayne, only had 3 passing touchdowns in weeks 1 through 7, 4 during that last Thursday night performance. So going on against the Seahawks and Dolphins over these next 2 weeks, make sure you get back to treating Puka and Cooper Kupp as the high-end wide receivers that they've been for the majority of their respective careers. So God forbid one does go down, Dwayne. That's when we get back to the top 5 heights for both. Not a bad backup plan to have there. Let's talk about another guy who is being impacted by some injuries. That is Jaguars tight end 1, Evan Engram. And at this point, Dwayne, maybe just pass catcher number 1, considering some of the injuries going on in Jacksonville.
Yeah, you got Gabe Davis, who left the game with a shoulder injury. We don't know for sure what's going to happen with him. We've got Brian Thomas Jr. First report was missing 2 to 4 weeks, with something with his ribs or chest. Then Doug Peterson comes out, calls it day to day. Good news, saying that the MRI didn't show any severe damage. So hopefully we get BTJ back next week. If you want to know what our thoughts are on him, go check out the utilization report over at FantasyLife.com, completely free. I walk through a range of outcome scenario for BTJ. It's pretty good, guys. We just got to get him healthy. But yeah, the main man of the hour here, we know this guy's going to be playing next week. That is Evan Engram. And we happen to have, a nice little sample size here last year, Ian, where we already saw a situation where Christian Kirk was out of the lineup. You had Calvin Ridley instead of Brian Thomas Jr. I know, guys, you're thinking, man, Brian Thomas Jr., he's way better than Calvin Ridley. And I get it. But over that stretch of games where they didn't have Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley last year had a 25% target share. And that's important because we saw Evan Engram come out here and earn a 27% target share despite having someone else in the offense also very involved. And that could be the case with BTJ. But over that stretch, Ian, we had Evan Engram just going absolutely bonkers. The guy averaged 19.6 fantasy points per game. I mean, a 9.3 utilization score. We're not coming out here and saying that's for sure what's going to happen. We're not saying he's going to be the tight end 1 the rest of the way, but I do think he's a borderline high-end tight end 1 while we're dealing with these injuries, especially if BTJ misses this weekend. If we have Gabe Davis also out, it's going to be really hard to project Evan Engram as in for anything than less than 8-9 targets. When you're getting that at the tight end position, you're probably going to be one of the top 3 guys for the week.
He had 143 targets last year. That's something that happened, man.
It's insane.
Still blows my mind. And again, you take away those wide receivers, who else are they going to be throwing the football to? So I know Engram hasn't exactly been, the best tight end in the world during the course of his career, but really over these last 2 years in Jacksonville, consistent tight end 1 numbers. And to Dwayne's point, when Kirk has left the field, already putting up big time production. So yeah, now we potentially add Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. to that. I mean, 8-9 targets, Dwayne. I'm saying double digits. I know you like to be conservative with the projections.
Oh, it could happen.
Yeah, look.
Well, I think rest of the year, even once you get BTJ back, it's going to be him and Engram. Gabe Davis, we've seen it long enough. He's going to have his games where he pops up and catches 2 touchdowns for you, but he's never really going to challenge them for those targets. We've seen him long enough to know that. So yeah, I think you should feel great about BTJ and Evan Engram the rest of the way if you have either one of those players.
Not Brian Thomas here, but we're going to talk about another pretty surprisingly great rookie wide receiver, Ladd McConkey, Dwayne, coming off a 2-touchdown performance that, as we mentioned, the Sheesh Report really was only 3 feet away from including a third. So a Chargers passing game that, no, not necessarily expecting them to go out there and throw for 300 yards a week. But since this bye, Dwayne, Justin Herbert playing as good as football as anyone, and accordingly getting a bit more volume than we were used to seeing early on in the year.
Yeah, so Herbert looking good, looking healthy, to your point, that's a big part of it. But whenever we look at the games before the bye, and we look at this thing we use called drop back rate over expectation. And all it does, it goes and looks at every single play that the team has had, and it looks at what they did, pass or run, versus what the league average is. So it's taking into account the down and distance, it's taking into account the score on the scoreboard. So when you hear a positive number, that means that they're actually throwing the ball more than the league average after accounting for all of that nuance. And since the bye week, they have a 4% drop back rate over expectation. Before the bye week, Ian, it was minus 5%. It was just the pure Harbaugh way of we're just going to pound the rock all the time. Now, you have to understand the fronts they're facing in the game can change this. That can cause you to check from run to pass. The matchup itself can dictate. So we can't always lean into these things and say, oh my God, this is what it's going to be for the rest of the season. But we have seen a shift. And I think it makes sense that you would want to let a really good young quarterback like Justin Herbert cook a little bit more, especially when he's got a young player like McConkey, Ian, really doing things at all levels of the field. He's a guy we talked about a couple of weeks ago. He was in the utilization report, and we talked about, using one of my favorite, terms from you. Hey, in another simulation, right? He might be a wide receiver one. We didn't realize that maybe that simulation could be this year. And so now the door is open for that. We saw the guy come out and play really well. He leads the team in target share this season at 24%. He's got a 6.4 utilization score on the year now, but over these last couple of games since the bye, he's up to 7.1. And that puts him really in a range where he could have a wide receiver 2 finish. So if we look at his historical comps using that utilization score, which accounts for all the things that matter the most for scoring fantasy points in the future, believe us, folks, we tested this stuff out. Wide receiver 13 to 24 finishes 44% of the time. Wide receiver 25 to 36, so those would be wide receiver 3s, 30% of the time. So 74% of the time, you've had a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3 player with Ladd McConkey. Funny enough, Ian, he's not available probably in your league or my league, but he's still available in 38% of Yahoo leagues right now. So Make sure you check your waiver wire, especially if you're playing in a smaller league. If so, we didn't put Ladd McConkey in the waiver wire write-up because he's already rostered too often. But go ahead and check for him. If he's there, he's the next top ad after another guy we'll talk about in a minute.
Really does seem to by far at this point be the pass catcher that Herbert understandably trusts the most. I know the 60-plus yard chunk touchdown catch and run was a fun highlight and everything, but that second touchdown, Dwayne, where defender just had his back turned to Herbert and he trusted McConkey to go up there, strong hand, snagged it in the back of the end zone. Truly great stuff from a duo that, again, has only gotten to play 7 games together to this point. So I'm sure there'll be much more exciting times ahead. Let's talk about one more upgrade in the utilization report, which, by the way, everyone, you can all check out for free over at FantasyLife.com. But yet another tight end, quickly rising up the ranks because they are now seemingly number 1 pass catcher on their team. Dwayne, talk about Buccaneers tight end 1, Cade Otton, and everything he has done over the past few weeks of action.
Yeah, Cade Otton without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin this past weekend, Ian, he had a 9.8 utilization score. Now, look, the utilization score is more predictive than fantasy points, but it's still a little bit fluky whenever you talk about just a 1-game sample. Things can go different ways. And you got to understand, a little over 20% of the score is made up of fantasy points themselves because that helps us account for production. So you don't want to get carried away too much. But the underlying data points were there, Ian. He had a 24% target share. 75% of the Bucs end zone targets went to Mr. Cade Otton. Baker Mayfield's looking for this guy when they get down inside the 10-yard line. He ended up with 29.1 fantasy points. The only non-quarterback to outscore Cade Otton this weekend was Mr. CeeDee Lamb. So he was in really good company. But the thing that I wanted to point out is, when we look at Cade Otton, the underlying data also for the year has really been his best, Ian. He was already on pace for career highs from a target share standpoint, 19%. So he was already showing some of those underlying breakout traits for a tight end before we even got to these games. And I think that's really important, and that helps us feel a little bit more confident that Cade Otton, he's not going to score 29 fantasy points. You guys know that. But he can keep this going. And man, if Baker's going to keep doing this, how does Baker come out and throw for over 300 yards again without Mike Evans or Chris Godwin? Obviously, Cade Otton was a huge part of that. But this guy's a low-end tight end 1, I think, the rest of the way. But until we get Mike Evans back, probably more of a mid-range tight end 1, Ian.
He's been a high-end tight end 1, Dwayne. Only George Kittle at this point has more PPR points than Cade Otton since week 3. What a time to be alive. So 4 top 8 finishes in his last 6 games. And again, hasn't appeared overly fluky. I know you linked some highlights from the great Hayden Winks in your utilization report article. And yeah, with Mike Evans not back until probably after the Buccaneers week 11 bye, Godwin out for the season, does seem like it is full wheels up for Cade Otton in fantasy land. So gotta love that. And I gotta love some more utilization report waiver wire goodness coming your way right after a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. A chill in the air, leaves falling to the ground, and football every weekend. That is what fall is all about, and you can make each weekend even more exciting by getting into the action with our partners at DraftKings, the #1 place to bet on touchdowns. And right now, all new customers who bet $5 will instantly get $200 in bonus bets. All you have to do is download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using our promo code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. Again, that's $200 in bonus bets instantly, and you can stay in on the action and use your $200 in bonus bets to bet anytime touchdowns on DraftKings. After all, DraftKings is the place to bet touchdowns. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. You can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use our promo code FANTASYLIFE and bet just $5 on any wager to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code FANTASYLIFE only at DraftKings Sportsbook. All right, Dwayne, we're going over some upgrades there, but now it's time to get into the waiver wire because let's face it, that's what we need to do to get those fantasy squads ready to hopefully continue chasing that championship glory. Kicking things off with the guy that, yes, we highlighted last week, but guess what? After what he did on Sunday, we're highlighting him again. Talk about Browns. Wide receiver 1, I guess, at this point. Cedric Tillman, Dwayne, and just how hard in the paint you're willing to go to acquire his services on the waiver wire.
Yeah, he's still available in 80% of leagues. So I get it in a lot of these deeper, high stakes type leagues. You had to get him last week, which we did, Ian. We got him on a ton of teams last week. Super excited about that. But the big thing here, I'm going to talk about Tillman in just a second. But there's this thing that's unlocking that upside for Tillman, right, with his skill set. And that thing is called Jameis Winston. And so when you look at Winston, he threw for 334 yards this weekend, 3 passing touchdowns. Like you mentioned, 3 drop picks. Jameis gonna Jameis, but he's going to keep throwing the ball no matter what. And the thing is, over his career, Ian, in games where he's played at least 90% of the snaps, Jameis Winston has averaged 277 yards per game. So that can help us feel pretty good about this upside that he is unlocking. And it's really important because up until now, you had Deshaun Watson under center. He was averaging 170 yards per game. Do you know how many wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 performances for a season that we have had since 2011 coming out of offenses that averaged 175 passing yards or less? The answer is 0 for wide receiver 1s. 0 for wide receiver 2s. Only 12% of those guys were able to even manage a wide receiver 3 finish. So this upgrade to Jameis is a major change for everyone involved for the Browns offense. If you want the full breakdown, guys, again, go check out the utilization report. We walk you through Jerry Jeudy. We also walk through Elijah Moore. We walk through all of these guys. And Ian, as you have it up now, you got the handy dandy comparison tool that you guys can look at, and you can see, and you can just narrow this down to what this looked like in this last game with Jameis. You can see Cedric Tillman did have the highest utilization score at 8.9. He led the team in targets at 24%, led the team in air yards 35%, end zone targets 38%, including that beauty late in the game that was a touchdown walk-off. Well, nearly a walk-off. The Ravens still had another chance. Yeah. But yeah, this is a situation where Tillman is one that it's not a fluky situation, Ian. Like, he's out there doing the things we want to see, especially paired with a guy like Jameis Winston. I'm willing to go 50% plus. I'm willing to put all my chips in the middle. Man, we're headed into week 9. Like, what else are we waiting for? If you need wide receiver help, and let's face it, if you're playing fantasy football, you probably need wide receiver help. Everyone is hurt. I mean, all the wide receivers are hurt. So you can't be shy with Cedric Tillman. He's shown the talent. He's in the right situation. The only potential downside, Ian, that I could think of was the fact that what if they did decide they didn't want to play Jameis after another 2 or 3 games? He does throw the picks, and they're like, well, we'll just get a look at DTR. That's the only possible scenario that I could see. But in my mind, like, we can't worry about that at this point. This guy has flashed. It's in the right situation. You want to get in on him. And just real quick, his utilization score, it's a small sample, but I do think it's painted a good, idea of what his upside could look like, Ian. 84% of the wide receivers with a utilization score that he's got have been a wide receiver 1. A wide receiver 1, guys. I'm not saying it's happening. I upgraded him to a low-end wide receiver 2. I'm more conservative than the utilization score because there's only 2 weeks of data. But the point is, you've seen what the upside looks like, and it's really, really good.
Again, not going to get to face an already bad and then even last Sunday banged up Ravens secondary each and every week. Be a lot cooler if we did. Going to have the Chargers and a bye, and Saints, Steelers, Broncos, Steelers, Chiefs going through about week 15 or so. But that said, Dwayne, you said it with Jameis. I mean, you think 1 or 2 interceptions is going to stop him from targeting Cedric Tillman? I do not think so.
And only one of those defenses scare us. It's the Broncos. All the rest are fine, but they're not like, we really only carry about the outliers for bad defenses. The Ravens, unfortunately, are one of those, and good defenses. And the only one that really scares me is the Broncos. All the rest of those are beatable. The Chargers have played no one.
Yeah. And Tillman's looked good, man. I mean, I don't want to compare him completely to Nico Collins, but he just has that, bigger size, body frame, and that speed to just be a problem for defenders to deal with. Big, fast people, guys. Pretty good at football, it turns out. Real quick before we move on, though, Dwayne, talk about Elijah Moore here, someone who, I remember in the offseason talking about how him and Rashad Bateman down the stretch of last year, even if they didn't have the production, I was noticing on film just, some pretty nice, clean routes from them, and had the exact same takeaway watching some Elijah Moore last week, breaking off some of those comeback routes and looking good now, arguably, somehow in the best situation of his career, perhaps.
Yeah, man. Look, and Moore's been a colossal disappointment since, teasing us with 18.9 fantasy points over a 6-game stretch in his rookie season. Like, he had us. We were all on the hook. Next year, like, he just kind of got in a spat with the coaching staff, was dealing with Zach Wilson. That didn't go well. Next year moves over to the Browns. And little did we know at the time, Deshaun Watson stinks. They were trying to integrate this guy into the offense early last year, and they just couldn't get the magic going. But it was definitely there last weekend with Jameis. You saw Jameis, like, this wasn't just him running wide open. There were timing routes between these two guys where they were already on the same page. So they're definitely locked in. If you can have a quarterback that can not just hit him on these kind of plays where you see it, throw it, let him use his athleticism, but also be hitting him on timing type routes where he's breaking, man, that's really good news for Elijah Moore. And again, very small sample size here, guys. But, there's a chance that Elijah Moore with Jameis Winston under center could be a wide receiver 2. I'm not going that far. I upgraded him to high-end wide receiver 4 status. We'll move him into wide receiver 3 next week with another strong performance from Jameis. But I'm just telling you, he could have a little more upside than there. And he is a guy that did at least flash at some point in his career. And you could, if you kind of squint, you could look at the circumstances he's been in and say, maybe there's a reason that Elijah Moore hadn't really done anything in these last couple of years, and maybe that's not all on him.
Cedric Tillman, wide receiver 15 and wide receiver 3 over these last 2 weeks. But yeah, Elijah Moore not too far behind, wide receiver 28 and wide receiver 21 finishes. So naturally, Dwayne, if we're hyped up about all these Browns pass catchers, also including David Njoku, and even only a slightly lesser extent Jerry Jeudy, got you feeling pretty good about Jameis Winston on that waiver wire as well. What percentage fab would you be down to go get famous Jameis?
Well, I think it really depends. Quarterbacks, typically you don't have to go as much. So even though we may rank, Jameis as, a really strong ad for this week, you just got to look across your league and you got to see how many quarterbacks are available on the wire. Now, Ian, a trend that you and I have noticed is that in these deeper high stakes leagues, more and more teams are just sticking with, rostering 2 quarterbacks. Some are rostering 3 throughout the season. So the waiver wire is pretty sparse. And a situation like that, man, if you need a quarterback, I'm willing to get a lot of chips down on Jameis Winston. I would say up to 25%. And here's the reason why. Again, it goes back to that 277 passing yards per game over his career, guys. We don't have to worry about this just being a 1-week wonder. Yeah, he got to play the Ravens. He's not going to get 334 and 3 touchdowns every weekend. But Jameis is pretty safe, Ian, to probably come out and give you 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, and, worst case, 4 picks, on top of the 2 touchdowns. But you'll take that in fantasy land. So it does come down to who's available. But if it was coming down to him versus another guy we'll talk about in a minute, Bo Nix, like, which way are you leaning?
Maybe for this week specifically, give me Bo Nix going up against that Ravens defense that, again, apparently is just a train wreck at this point. But rest of the season, man, we certainly feel better about Jameis's passing upside because let's go ahead and get into Bo Nix. Really, the surprising element here has just been how good on the ground he's been. And it hasn't completely caught us by surprise. Again, I remember one of the great stats we were throwing around this offseason was the fact that Bo Nix had all those rushing touchdowns in, X amount of games at Oregon. I believe he was really close to Caleb Williams, actually, in terms of his fantasy points per game from purely rushing production. And we've continued to see that, Dwayne, coming off that QB2 performance and coming off another game in which his scramble rate is really up there with the most fantasy-friendly quarterbacks in the NFL.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and really he's coming off, he's on not a 4 game, but 3 out of the last 4 games have been really good for Bo Nix. Yeah. He scored 23.1 points against the Raiders. Not a good defense. 20.7 against the Chargers. Again, guys, the Chargers have played no one. Don't freak out about the Chargers this weekend. Start your Browns. The Chargers have not proven anything. The Saints, 14.2. So that was a little bit rougher, but then the Panthers, he lights them up for 29.8. The only word of caution here is we just kind of saw Caleb Williams go through a stretch like this before the bye week where he got to play a lot of defenses like this and ended up looking really great. He comes out and he plays an improved Commanders defense after the bye week and just really struggles. So I still think the struggles could be there. Even Sean Payton himself said, which I thought it was kind of funny how quick he was to kind of, talk his quarterback down a little bit. Guys, that was not a good team we played this weekend. Come on, just say Bo Nix played well, coach. Just give him a little credit this one time. The dude came out here and threw for 284 yards and 3 touchdowns against the Panthers. But you mentioned it, Ian, it's that underlying rushing. The underpinnings of that is really what keeps Bo Nix. That makes him that borderline. I don't want to say borderline, high-end QB2. I think he could end up in the high-end QB2 range. 155 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground over these last 4 games. On the season, he ranks 7th in design rush attempt share, 9%. So, guys, what that means is they're calling it a run play from the beginning. It could go to the running back. It could go to the quarterback. The quarterback could decide to keep it. It could be an option between him and the running back. But the point of it is they know the quarterback could be running the ball when the play is snapped. And then the scramble rate, you mentioned, 13% of his dropbacks turn into scrambles. That's the 6th most in the NFL. So he's on pace for 550 rushing yards and 8.5 touchdowns. I don't know if he's going to get to the 9 touchdowns, but the 550 yards feels pretty good. And he is a guy that punched it in multiple times before he got to Oregon, back when he was playing for Auburn. So I don't want to completely discount his chance, to score those touchdowns. So if you look at Nix, and let's say we do discount his ability in the passing game, and we realize it's been a pretty good stretch of games, probably not going to be that good. And let's say he throws between 170 and 210 yards this year on average, but per game. And then let's say he averages 30 to 40 rushing yards per game. Right now he's like at 34. On average, those have been close to a QB1, Ian. 4 of them have finished as QB1s, and on average they finished as QB14. So if he does keep the passing game thing going, you're going to have a quarterback 1. If he doesn't, you're still going to have someone that in the right matchups, you might have a quarterback 1, and he's a borderline quarterback 1 anyway.
Matchups have been cozy, but to Nix's credit, man, does seem like just from the eye test, his processing speed has been getting a lot better. And even despite having all those yards against the Panthers, man, meat was left on the bone. Downfield dimes to Troy Franklin and Lil Jordan Humphrey were dropped. Marvin Mims didn't get his head around on one. Cortland Sutton fumbled at the 1-yard line. So hopefully bigger and better days to come, especially this Sunday against the Ravens. Maybe not so much against the Chiefs and Arrowhead the week after, but at least for week 9, feeling good about Bo Nix and company. Let's stay in the AFC West, though, Dwayne, with a wide receiver who should be back and hopefully doing big things in an offense now throwing the football. Talk about Quentin Johnston, someone who we did see flash a little bit before he got injured.
Yeah, and that's the main thing. He's kind of off the radar right now. He's available in 85% of leagues. He had a team-leading 85% route participation before he got injured. So he's a guy that they've shown they wanted out there. And honestly, Quentin Johnston, for as bad as he was last year, he was playing well, and he had a 21% target share. That was 2nd on the team behind Lad McConkey before the injury. And to your point, if we are going to see the Chargers willing to loosen things up a little bit, get the ball in Justin Herbert's hands more, throw the ball a little more often, those could be more fantasy points moving forward. We're not going to go crazy with the guy and say he's a must start, but if you're playing in one of these deeper leagues, Quentin Johnston is a nice guy to have on your bench as a wide receiver 4 with upside. If suddenly we do see this trend continue with the passing, that's going to give him more value.
Now, Dwayne, time for some targets who, we get it, might not be available in your league, pal. That said, per the analytics, they are in fact available in 40 to 60% of leagues out there. So kicking things off, Dwayne, with a certain Bills, a wide receiver who ripped off back-to-back top 16 finishes. Keon Coleman, 59% available at the moment.
Yeah, so Keon Coleman has a 6.0 utilization score over the last 3 games. That's not crazy good, but it puts him in that range where he can give you these boom wide receiver 2 games. His lows are going to be wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, but that makes him a borderline wide receiver 3 right now, Ian, but he does offer that wide receiver 2 upside. So 21% target share over the stretch, 31% of the team's end zone targets. And we do have Josh Allen, looking like he's getting back on a little bit of a heater here over the last couple of games. We've also seen them throwing the ball more, Ian. This was a run-heavy offense for the first several weeks of the year. The last two games, the Bills have an 8% and 7% drop back rate over expectation. Those are real positives for the passing game, in Buffalo. So we'll see. Amari Cooper's going to eventually integrate into this offense, and that is going to take some targets away. But right now, the Bills are pretty much a spread it around kind of offense. The tough part about it is I can't ever tell you which one of these guys is going to go off. But again, if it ever consolidates at any point and you have Josh Allen in an offense throwing the ball a lot, it's going to be a player that you're going to want to have on your roster. So like you mentioned, he's available too often.
I was going to say, Dwayne, how good Keon's looked over these past 2 weeks, earning the chances for fades coming down with these contested catches. Khalil Shakur has somehow caught 36 of 38 targets this year. It's like none of you even care. Obviously, Amari Cooper is going to get more involved and do stuff, but are you maybe backing down a little bit from the potential wide receiver 1 heights from Amari? Because I just don't really see these other guys completely going away.
Well, I mean, to be fair, we've always said that Amari is a mid-range wide receiver 2. That means really his most likely range of outcomes is he's either a high-end wide receiver 2 down to a low-end wide receiver 2 with a chance to maybe be a wide receiver 1. But we've never been that bullish on saying that Amari would be a wide receiver 1 in this offense. So I still feel really good about it. I mean, Amari is a proven, guy over time. And the Buffalo Bills have not shown a willingness to play any of these dudes full time. I don't know why they still limit Khalil Shakur, even a game where you don't have Curtis Samuel out there. Why not get the guy out there for 95% of the plays? I don't get it. Keon Coleman, same thing. Out there only 74% of the pass plays this last weekend. Got to get Matt Collins on the field. I just don't understand some of the personnel moves with these guys.
Moving right along, the third wide receiver from the Browns we'll be talking about today. Dwayne, the guy making the most money, though, Jerry Jeudy, still available in 55% of leagues. Actually has been the odd man out in this offense. Targets over these past 2 weeks, 21 for Njoku and Tillman, 18 for Elijah, just 14 for Jerry Jeudy. But small sample size and, not as certainty that he doesn't eventually rise to the top.
Yeah, I mean, with Jerry Jeudy, we've got a long enough track record now. I think we know, he's not he shouldn't have been a first-round NFL draft pick. But he does, if there's anything that could give you one last chance, Ian, is playing with Jameis Winston. So I think that's all that we have to really acknowledge here. I mean, the target earning has not been great for Jeudy. I mean, he's at 16%. He is out there the most, 99% route participation with Jameis. So, I mean, he's on the field. That's going to give him opportunities. I think he's most likely a boom bust wide receiver 4. That's what his utilization score says. That's what all the underlying data tells us. But there are some finishes in there. There are some outliers where you see some wide receiver 2 finishes from guys like Jeudy, and you see some wide receiver 3 finishes. Roughly 20% of the time, someone in his range has been able to climb into that territory. So don't want to completely rule him out. I do prefer the other 2 guys first, but Jerry Jeudy, if he is available, is definitely worth rostering because of Jameis.
Another young wide receiver, Jalen McMillan for the Bucs, looking like he has a full-time role and had a chance last week for a long touchdown. Just sadly wasn't quite on the same page as Baker. But that said, Dwayne, Baker keeps on keeping on. We should see some big things from this wide receiver room eventually.
Yeah, 90% route participation. So he was the wide receiver 1 from a playing standpoint. He is their 3rd round pick. He's the guy that I think does offer the most upside. And one thing you got to be real careful with, Ian, is target shares on a 1-week basis. They can be very up and down. Right? Typically, the thing that over short periods of time we want to look at are snaps for running backs, and then we want to look at routes for wide receivers. They're more sticky over the short term. Once we get 3 or 4 game sample, we can start to look more at the target shares and things like that. But the point being, McMillan didn't come through with a huge target share this last weekend, but he is the guy that the Bucs chose to put on the field, and Baker is baking, so that still gives him a chance. He's available in 51% of leagues. I still have him in that wide receiver 4 range. I want to see another game, so I think he's also likely to get cut, with some people trying to look for bigger and better things. So McMillan probably won't be a very expensive ad off the waiver wire this week.
Let's close things out with a couple running backs who, no, we're probably not going to feel good about starting them in week 9. But, Dwayne, the handcuff potential remains sky high, particularly with Breece Hall's backup, rookie Braylon Allen.
Yeah, Braylon Allen available in 63% of leagues, and over this last weekend we saw Todd Downing actually kind of revert to what the previous staff had been doing, which was giving Braylon Allen a larger workload than we had anticipated when we started the season. Breece Hall was still fine, guys, but he wasn't getting all the carries. We saw Braylon Allen get 43% of the rushing attempts. That was a season high. So the nice thing about a player like that is he's already an elite handcuff, because we've already seen how well he can play and the coaches prefer him. So we know if Breece Hall goes down, it's probably going to be all Braylon Allen. The other part is, let's say that we don't have an injury to Breece Hall. he's the perfect kind of handcuff to have on your bench, because as we get to the weeks where we're going to be dealing with all the buys, Ian, like, you could still get him in your running back 2 spot, and he can give you 8 or 9 points. I would prefer carrying a guy like that if things broke my way, like, he could give me a lot of fantasy points, than just trying to wait and pick a guy for each week. You might find a guy in the waiver wire for your bye week, but I like having a guy like Braylon Allen upside, and then he can give me running back 2. He can fill my running back 2 spot in a pinch.
A flex with benefits, if you will. Something that I think also applies to Seahawks RB2, Zach Charbonnet.
Yeah, exact same scenario here, but over the last 2 games, we've really kind of seen that firm grip that Kenneth Walker has had over this backfield. Kind of, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's completely slipping from his grips, but we have seen Charbonnet more involved. He's getting more of the passing down work. So with that said, already one of the elite handcuffs, and he is a guy that could now be, to your point, Ian, one of those flex with benefits. Might only be 8 or 9 points, but that's still the kind of guy I would like to be rostering, because if something does happen to Kenneth Walker, we've already seen what that means. That can mean 20 fantasy points. We saw that earlier this season.
19 and 21 touches in those 2 games without Walker for Charbonnet. Truly an elite high-end handcuff. So that's going to wrap up this edition of the Fantasy Life Show, everybody. But make sure you check out our waiver wire tool if you are so inclined over at FantasyLife.com. As you can see, we have our ad of the week, waiver wire priority, suggested fab, and their available amount. Also some bids. You can see the average. And again, go through where, we give you guys the top dogs, but also some stopgaps, some stashes, positions, different waiver wire tools of all shapes and sizes. Dwayne, Kendall Valenzuela working very hard to get this in a good position to hopefully, again, help make your fantasy teams that much stronger. So again, I want to thank you guys for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. We'll be back tomorrow morning, Dwayne, myself, and the great Chris Allen, breaking down some of the biggest questions ahead of week 9. But until then, just go out there and enjoy your life. For Dwayne, for producer Kelsey, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.